all here. So with that, we will call the meeting to order. I'd like to remind everyone that the mission of the Great Falls International Airport Authority is to optimize transportation services and development in the region, and our vision is to maximize the airport's benefit to the region. Welcome, and please remember the board appreciates participation from the public. And if you have any comments throughout the meeting, please get our attention, stand, state your name and address, and your comments will be heard. So thank you much. With that, with the quorum of the board present, I call the meeting order. Roll call. Commissioner Eritz. Here. Commissioner Bakke is here. Commissioner Evans is absent. Commissioner Gibbs. Here. Commissioner Lalonde. Here. Commissioner Smith. Here. I didn't forget about you. And Commissioner Timbo. Here. All right, let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we'll start off with the consent agenda. It is made up of routine day-to-day items that require board action but not appear to have significant public impact. Items may be pulled from the consent agenda for separate discussion, vote by any board member. Item A, approval of board meeting minutes from April 2021. B, payroll checks totaling $121,512.12. C, maintenance and operation checks number 26020 through 26092 totaling $617,010.17. Item D, approved passenger facility charge totaling $36,000. And finally, E, financial reports for April of 2021. Are there any items that member would like to pull for further discussion? All right. Can I have a motion to accept the consent agenda as stated?
I'll make a motion to accept the October 20th, 2021 agenda.
October.
I mean,
How about May?
May.
There we go. I think I missed a month there. All right. So I have a motion to accept the May 25th consent agenda.
It's April.
I'm sorry. May.
This is the April consent agenda.
Yes, we always do the consent.
Okay, the consent agenda.
It is
for
the May
April.
consent agenda.
Yeah,
It's just the April.
April financial.
We don't need a month in there.
as
April
printed,
financials.
as printed.
We're trying to be too
Okay.
specific enough, that's it. All right. I have a motion to accept the consent agenda as stated. And a second.
I'll second.
All right. All in favor of accepting consent agenda as stated, do so saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The consent agenda is accepted. Let's start off with the director's report.
Yeah, well, we'll be real brief this month because we have a long agenda, but April traffic did rebound quite a bit. I'm sure it's our largest monthly or year-over-year increase, 1,400% increase year-over-year. That brought us to about 9,600 boardings, still well below our normal boardings, which would be around 14,000. So we're still about 30% light, but obviously a massive improvement. We expect that to continue into May. Certainly the flights look pretty full so far this month, so we'll see how we do. Another note, the City Commission did approve our TIF application last week. As you may recall, we requested about $800,000 in TIF funding. There's about 110, 130 in there right now in the current TIF, and then we plan to ask the city to bond the other portion of that next summer in order to pay for our utility work out there. As it sits right now, the city says there isn't quite enough to bond that amount, but Love's should be completing their construction in November, they say. So it would be in the city building by my estimation next summer. And then on top of that, we expect a transition in the FedEx lease that could add some taxable value in the TIF also over the next year. So we expect by the time we get to next summer and we're ready to bond, that we'll have enough money in the TIF to get those bonds issued. We'll have to go back and ask the city to pass a resolution for bonding, but we're really on our own now with getting those utilities in and getting a unit or two constructed with the manufacturing tenant in order to get those bonds issued. So that's the path ahead. We need to get busy on the utilities, and I talked to Chris even this morning about their efforts to get the utilities designed so we can start on that on the units next spring. In other developments, in the last month, we did receive from the FAA a clean bill on the reuse of that land. As you may recall, our last master plan envisioned that area with some commercial development. This wasn't exactly what we were proposing with this development that we're planning. It's more of a light industrial development, so the FAA had to look at that again. They did approve that use. We will have to go through a 7460 process, which is true with anything we build over there, just to check the heights, but that area is pretty low risk for height, especially with the type of development we're talking about. They also informed us that we would not require a new NEPA on that site since we had included the stormwater impacts and that type of thing from a similar development in our master plan, so there's been a programmatic review. We will have to go through a local environmental process with DEQ here in Montana, but we will not have to subject that through a federal process, which is good news. And then lastly, we had some conversations with Dick Anderson since the TIF improvement and the current plan, and again, in this environment, plans change rapidly, but the current plan would be we would construct 4 units in the first phase of this development. 2 of those units would be purchased by the airport authority, and they would be offered for resale. Those would be purchased at cost plus overhead from Dick Anderson, and we would offer those for resale. In the interim, we would move into those with a lot of our equipment that's down at the south end, the north end, so that we can release the rest of those buildings up there and try to get those over to someone that wants to rent them. We have 2 tenants interested as we sit here today, and so we want to get out of that area in general and open up that area for release, and then we'll come down here and move our surplus snow equipment and our summer stuff down into these buildings. The 3rd unit will be purchased by the car wash that we've talked about in the past, and then the 4th unit Dick Anderson would build on spec. And so we have a 4-unit development in the first phase. It could be that we sell some additional units. We've both been approached by folks interested in more units. It could be that we could sell many more units than that, and the first phase might include more than 4. Those decisions are yet to come, but in the interim, we'll be working towards achieving what we need to achieve for that TIF bond issue next year. So good news there. On the bathrooms, we have completed the bathrooms in bag claim and post security, and right now they're tiling the upstairs, I believe it's the men's room, isn't it?
Yeah, they're working on the men's room right now.
Yeah, they're working on the upstairs men's room on the 3rd floor. Once they're done with that, we'll move into the women's room and get that completed. With the upgrades that were made up there by Oakwell's for the last year, it seemed prudent to go ahead and get these bathrooms done while we had some cash to get them done, and so we've proceeded with that. Work is underway on the TSA remodel. I was in there a few days ago and they were working on flooring. They've pretty much gutted the space that needed to be gutted. They've moved a few walls, done a lot of the electrical and data work already, painted, and now they're going back in and getting the flooring in and some of the other fixes in that area. By the state of things, I really hope they can be in there in June. So that'll be beneficial for us because the space is just about 25% larger, wouldn't you say, Laura? 20%, somewhere in there. Quite a bit larger. So once they move into that, they'll be paying more in rent, which is good. And that clears us up to begin remodeling in the ticketing lobby because we'll have that space below us here that we can use to move airlines around and begin to demo. So good news there. Let's see, we'll talk about the projects, other projects in the, what about the Mang lighting, Rod?
Yeah, the Mang lighting, that Colvico company that's doing that, this is the assault zone landing lights on 1735 out there. Colvico's the company that's going to install the lighting and do the electrical work out there, so they've already, well, last week and today they've mowed some equipment in. They're hoping to start this first week of June. So, and it's probably only a couple week project there. So get that going. And then the Mang ramp, that's all the guards project, but that should be, they should start paving this week, doing the concrete. So doing a test strip this week, I think. So we'll see a lot of action down there too. We'll probably be closing off portions of Alpha at sometime just limited times there for painting or paint removal, so not much there. And then on John's warehouse project, they started surveying this morning for that, so.
And then you guys probably saw Lowe's on the way in. They've got practically every square inch of that property opened up right now, and making incredible progress. So they've told us November will be the open date around the middle of the month. So
It's ambitious.
Did they announce what restaurants going in there?
yes, we heard last week that it's Chester's Chicken, Subway, and Godfather's Pizza.
What's the first one?
Chester's Chicken.
Never heard of that.
That's a national brand.
Kind of like
They're usually
Popeyes without the spice.
Yeah, they're usually in grocery stores or gas stations. They're, kind of a, national brand though.
Yeah.
Okay.
Kentucky Fried Chicken from the South.
We used to be able to get it at home. Bucks.
Is that Chester's and Schulte's? Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah.
So there you go. That's pretty good then. I've had Schulte's.
All right, anything else?
That's, one other thing, Mr. Chair, I request that we move item 3 up to the top of the agenda.
Item 3 to the top of the agenda. Okay. And that is, we have visitors here, we're going to talk about it, or?
Nope, just prefer the order.
Okay, gotcha. All right, so with no further director report or capital project updates, as we look through the item number 9, we'll be stricken since we had technical difficulties getting the everything in for the director's review. We're going to push that off till next month. And of the items that we are doing, are there any agenda items that present a conflict of interest or consequently will require a member to abstain from discussion and or vote? Excellent. With none of those being seen, let's start off with item number 3, which is now number 1, parking operation conversion to in-house self-pay.
Yes, as we've discussed last January, we have been completing an analysis of the parking operation, both historically and looking forward. And as this memo says, we're prepared to make the recommendation that we in-house parking and move that to a self-park model. The reasons for that are multiple. We've been looking to this moment as a way to begin to finance 24-hour operations staff at GTF. That's been a long held desire of ours to have GTF trained, GTF employed folks here overnight and on the mid shift, so that when we do have those occasional diversions or emergencies or other events, that we have someone that we can train to respond to those events and have that level of consistency. And so I don't take that factor alone lightly, that this is, in the time that I've been here, this almost 11 years, this has always been a point at which we thought we would likely transition to that model if we took the parking in-house. Looking at the revenue stream, as you can see there, in terms of gross revenue, our parking lot generally is good for $1 million a year. We peaked back in 2014 and 15, when 13, 14, and 15, when the Canadian dollar was at par with the US dollar. And a lot of that extra cream on the top of that is the Canadians. Unlike the locals who can bother their neighbor to bring them in at 5 in the morning or hire an Uber, many of the Canadians don't have another means of getting up to the airport when they're traveling down to pick up an Allegiant flight. And those were the days when we had the peak Allegiant flying. And so oftentimes we would see the parking lot would be 20-30% Canadian on those Canadian holidays and around the spring break time for Lethbridge schools. We hope that once the border reopens, that'll bring back 100,000 or so of revenue. But as you can see in 2020, we were about half what our peak was. We think the road to recovery is probably a 3-year recovery for us to get back to that $1 million plus. And in discussions about parking over the last couple of months and even last year, really when we struck that last deal, we were in the 14-15 limelight, and we struck a pretty aggressive deal with the parking lot operator. And so in those discussions, what we believe is if we tried to rebid this, our revenue would actually decline below where it was even back in the 17, 18, 19 period. Even if we tried to extend the current contract, the terms would be less favorable where the concessionaire would desire to keep more of the parking dollars, and we would see less of it. And combine that with the pressure on the minimum wage that we've all seen, that's certainly drifting up to well above where it was a few years ago. We're going to see declining parking revenue most likely until we see a major increase in the number of passengers. And I mean, a major increase beyond where we were in 2019, something in the way of new scheduled service in the next 3 years. And so in light of that, we think it makes sense to move more to a yield management model where we try to keep as much of the revenue that is produced. And we think the best way of doing that is to go to self-park and eliminate that employee factor out in the lot. If you know, if you're familiar with the operation over the last year, the lot's already operating in a self-park model where the manned lane has been closed for about a year now, and folks have been checking out through the auto pay stations. And so we think it makes sense at this point to continue that model since we're already offering that level of service. In order to do that, we'd have to make some changes out there in the lot. A lot of those are upgrades of the existing server and the existing firewall. We don't own the firewall. Obviously, it's owned by the parking lot operator, so we would have to put those in place. We also owe the current contractor $265,000. I don't know that maybe Deb was here, but I don't think anyone else was when we remodeled in 2015. But we moved the toll plaza. It used to be kind of in the middle of the lot. It kind of had a couple of photo fair booths out there without a cover. And we had one pay station, which was kind of a chintzy one. That was a self-pay station. We moved everything under one large cover, moved it out, got some space. If you may remember before, the lines kind of converged with the parking lot, and so you would have people trying to enter the line in the middle that were waiting in line in the aisleway that couldn't get around to the end. So we just had a real mess. And one of the things we did with that project is by moving it out to the water tower, we gave ourselves a long queue. So there's a long queue road that goes into that parking lot, giving us space to get cars queued up. We also went to 4 lanes instead of the sort of 2.5 we had before. 2 of those lanes are manned lanes today. One of them has a small photo fair booth, the other one has the main office. In order to implement the self-pay, we think we should buy 2 more self-pay machines, probably all credit card. We will make that decision in the next couple of months if we'll even accept cash. We may go to a full credit card model. It's just much more reliable. The cash tendering pieces of those machinery are what often breaks. We have 1 lane now that is capable of taking cash, and so we can leave that one in operation if we decide cash needs a little bit longer to run out. But we'll be looking at that in the next couple of months. We buy 2 new machines. We'd remove the photo fair booth that's basically bolted to the ground, so we would pull that out, put one of the pay stations in that location, and then we would make modifications to the main office in order to have a facing that could accommodate that machine inside the office. The office would remain the location for the servers and that type of thing. In order to make all that work, we need to get some fiber to that office. Currently, that office is operated independent from the airport. The parking lot operator uses some photo cards, but for us to do this operation, we're going to need some cameras. And so that camera feed is going to be more than what we could really rely on 4G to do. Maybe 5G could do it, but we think the better option would go hardwired and get some feed from there to here. We also have to have a camera system, a monitoring station that would have some memory to it, so that it can store a little bit of those things that would happen if someone crashes into the toll booth or tries to steal one of our machines. We want to have that on camera. But the main reason we would have cameras is that when a passenger has problems and they hit the intercom button, our plan would be to wire that to come to one of our duty phones. And so what we want to make possible is for our employees to have access to those cameras here in the building so that they can see what's happening. In talking to Helena about their operation and their 24/7 self-pay unmanned, what they say more often than not happens is someone with a large truck doesn't want to get too close to the queue because they can't get their door open to pay and it's too high to stick it out the window. So they'll park 10 feet back and then walk to the machine and pay, and then the gate arm doesn't open because they're not on the loop. They said that's one of the most common transactions. And so if we have a camera, we can say, hey, you're pull forward 8 feet and the gate should open, that type of thing. And so we want some cameras in there so we can see what's going on. And in addition to that, and we'll talk about it in the budget, in order for us to implement this, we would have to do some hiring, and we've got those positions already in the current budget that's there. And so our recommendation is that we move forward with self-pay and in-house this operation. We do think that eventually this could be a $300,000 a year increase in revenue, even after we deduct out the employee and the cost of running the parking lot. In the near term, we think that's probably $100,000, maybe $80,000 a year in increased revenue. Well, I shouldn't say it that way, net revenue. The increased revenue is still going to be 100, maybe 150,000. But of course, we're hiring an employee. We're going to have the lots shoveled. We're going to have to buy receipt paper and tickets and loop material to replace the loops in the ground, so we have all the parts on hand. But we do think net-wise, we can generate about $100,000 a year. In a few years, as we get back to normal, we think that'll go up substantially. And so in light of the fact that, number one, we want to move towards 24-hour operations, we think that's a responsible thing to do. And number two, it's difficult for us to really find $100,000 in new revenue, maybe even up to $300,000. Very few opportunities afford themselves for us to generate that kind of new money. We think the best recommendation is to take it in-house. And so in order to do that, we have kind of a complex recommended action. As you can see here, we're asking for a number of things. We want authorization to pay the $265. That is a contractual requirement for the unamortized portion of the improvements we made a few years ago. Typically what we've done in the past is we've purchased that equipment through our parking lot operator and then amortized it out over 8 or 10 years. This is the remaining overhang on that 2015 project. We want authorization to implement the steps of bringing the parking in-house. Obviously, there's a lot that goes into that. And we also want authorization to contract, to find and contract with a credit card processing and encryption company. So we don't currently accept credit cards. Even our tenants don't pay us with credit cards. And so we're going to have to go out and get an encryption, credit card encryption company to help us process those transactions. And in addition, obviously, we'll be paying a portion of that revenue in fees as we process those credit cards.
So is the $300,000 that were in there, does that include the $265 to pay off the parking operator?
Yeah, so we have to pay about $300,000. $265,000 of that is the cost of the cost we have to pay to
Buy the equipment.
To buy the equipment. We also think we're going to have to do a few other things in there that kind of we've spelled out there that's going to cost cash. And then we also have down, as you see here, several unrelated, well, they're related but separate board actions that we're asking for in this same meeting. We need the IT contract to get the server and everything set up, firewall set up for this. We also have the self-pay equipment that we need to purchase. And so this is kind of the gateway request, is this $300,000 to pay the contractor, make some modifications to the lane structure, and then we have a couple more follow-on items that we'll be asking for later in the meeting.
Gotcha. All right. All you got for that?
That's all I have.
All right, so with that, can I have a motion to give the airport director approval to initiate the following action to start a self-pay and undertake the capital project in a not to exceed $300,000 to modify the parking booth, install new IT equipment, extend the fiber parking booth, and install camera equipment, and authorization to pay $265,000 to the parking operator and remaining parking equipment amortization pursuant to our existing contract, authorization to initiate steps to implement the in-house self-parking, and authorization to conduct a selection for and execute a contract with a credit card inscription and credit card processing.
Let's just say encryption, not
That's what I was going to say.
encryption. Yeah.
All right,
Spell check
encryption.
the copy.
Got it. All right. I have a motion for all of that.
I'll make a motion.
All right. And with the motion, do I have a second? I'll assume that was a second. All right, with a motion and a second, do we have a discussion? Any questions, comments, discussion about that?
So the break even, I think we went through this before in the work session, but 5 years probably as far as a break even on the cash flow, even though 70% is coming from the feds
Well,
of the initial cash, but it's our cash that we use somewhere else.
right. I mean, and so that's the question is, I mean, there's a number of questions involved in that. We think, if we ignore where the money comes from, the payback's probably about 3 to 4 years. A lot depends on what we project the passengers to do. But I really would think in 2 to 3 years, most likely, we're going to be back at normal parking of 1.1 million. And so, I mean, if that's the case, then we're going to recover in about 2 years of normal operations. Question is, how long does it take us to get there? So it's probably 3 or 4 years, for the payback, maybe a 5th year if another variant of this comes out that defeats the vaccine and we're looking at a slow, progressive move forward to get back to normal. Obviously, the business travelers are important to us because they pay to park, even more so than do the leisure travelers. So yes, I think probably we're looking 4 to 5 years for full recovery. Now, that being said, it's rare for us to have extra funds in hand, beyond our reserve requirement. And given that all of a sudden we're going to get ladled on us a lot of free cash flow, and it so happens that some of that, those funds, Carissa and CARES both, can be used for this. CARES, we can use the remainder of our CARES to pay the 265 because it's an operating expense. The implementation of South Park we can pay for because it does reduce spread, because we'll be eliminating hundreds of human interactions. And so, given that, we have this unusual situation where we have cash, and this is probably the most profitable way we could deploy that cash to implement this. And so, all of those things being said, yes, I think it's a 4 to 5 year payout with the caveat that, hey, incidentally, we have cash that we can use for this right now.
So our payback may end up being quicker.
Well, if you don't consider the CARES money as part of our money, we would use it elsewhere, then the payback is almost, a year or two because, we're able to take that money, largely pay off everything, and then immediately move to a revenue stream that begins to lower our airline rates right away. So when you look at it from that perspective, the payback to the airlines is very fast. I mean, maybe even this year, because we're basically knocking the cost out with these CARES funds and then immediately beginning to generate new non-airline revenue, which helps us keep the rates low. Thank you.
John, is one full-time employee can be enough to deal with the extra responsibility?
No.
Whatever they
No. So a couple of things. So you may recall we eliminated a law enforcement FTE last year mid-year, and we did not replace it. And so we actually had an FTE, full-time equivalent, sorry. We actually had a position in last year's budget that was approved, and actually we had them on hand at the time the year started, that we'll hire again. So we'll get 2 new people, which will cover basically the mid-shift and the overnight shift for most of the days. Now, you can't work 7 days a week, so there'll be some gaps in there still, but the large majority of their time, they will be carrying that phone and responding to people hitting the intercom button. And we also have LEOs during the daytime who can also do the same thing. A lot of those calls are going to be very simple. Hey, it ate my credit card, or I lost my ticket. So we'll be coming back to the board and asking for probably in August a lost ticket fee that we'll establish, which is probably going to be about 2 weeks of parking. That if you lose a ticket, it's now a charge of $120. I think that's what Helena has, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a 2 week.
2 weeks. Our 2 weeks is cheaper than that, so maybe we'll come up with $100 for a lost ticket or something. And so, and they'll just have to guide someone through. Well, put in $100, and then we'll also tell them, hey, if you want to email us back your ticket stub, if it's less than $100, email us a picture of your ticket stub, and we'll send you a few bucks back. Those types of things. And so a lot of that interaction during the daytime, we're going to have to handle in the admin office. And I think we can. I believe we have capacity for it. And in addition, that LEO function is going to have to take on the nuisance requirements of managing those calls. The good news is, if by going this route, if we decide that it stinks and we're bad at it, we can hire a company to answer the intercom. That's a service that most of these larger parking lot operators offer, is they will answer the intercom button and deal with your situation remotely. They can do that in Dallas. There's a big call center. Walker Parking runs. There's several of them. So we have a way out of this, that we could implement. And someday, if we decide we're just too busy, we can reman that booth. That's the whole goal of modifying the booth so that we can put someone back in there if we have to. So we have some backup plans. We think this is going to work. And one of the other things I think the memo mentions that I want to do is to buy the pay-by-phone app, so that while you're down in Bag Plain, we can have some signs there, hey, you can pay your bill while you're here. And one of the things we're kind of looking at that we might even implement this fall would be to knock another exit out of the parking lot, kind of over on the side there, where you could kind of exit through the trees with a scanner. So you just scan and you would be able to get out if you paid with the phone. So the whole idea will be to take volume off of the toll booth as much as possible, which should increase the customer satisfaction and limit the impact on our FTEs. But no, those duties will be spread over the admin office and then the 2 new FTEs and some of the overnight security too that supplements our employees. But as the director down in Durango years ago, a friend of mine told me when he implemented it, and I think he did it about 5 years ago, when you really boil it down and you figure that a 24/7 operation, no matter how you cut it, even at minimum wage, costs $150,000 a year. You can open the gate a lot of times for $150,000 a year. And so, I think that's the right customer service answer, is if your security guard is busy and he can't vet the situation quickly, and it sounds like a valid situation, just open the gate. Just open it, let them out. It's not gonna kill us. We've got $150,000 a year we can spend on doing that. That's a long answer.
Which playing devil's advocate, does the rules allow us to let a Leo leave the building to investigate that? Or
Yes.
Does it all have to be remotely done?
No, our Leos they come and go. They do the perimeter checks. They have the run of the entire airport overnight, and so hopefully they're not leaving the property. We don't want that. Policing downtown or something.
Okay, excellent. Any other questions? Good discussion. Comments, concerns? Okay, with no further questions, comments, or concerns regarding the public parking operation, all in favor of allowing the airport director to move forward with the self-pay for parking initiative, all in favor saying aye?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, nay? All right, passes.
Thank you.
Do you want to jump right to the parking lot IT since we're...
No, I think we can. Let's go back up to 1. I
We're
think.
going to go back up to O&M?
Yeah.
Okay, so item number 2 then, the O&M budget for FY 21-22.
Yes, as I previously mentioned, the O&M budget does have an extra position in it this year, and that's why I wanted to do the parking operation first. So that is the primary reason that our budget's up about 7% year over year. Last year, as the pandemic played out, we were able to make some cuts to the operating budget real time. So the budget we approved last year, we made quite a few cuts to the landscaping budget. We made a couple cuts to the consumables type of things that we knew we would use less of. And then we made some reductions in the salaries because we had a couple things that we did there. And so the cumulative total, we end up with a 7% jump in operating budget, which is well outside what we normally would see for our operation. But it is an increase. We'll be going to those 14 FTEs as we mentioned. We did meet with the budget committee about a month ago, and we discussed both a 12 FTE full-time equivalent budget and a 14 FTE budget. The difference being that one person that was budgeted last year, but we cut that position during the year. And so we ended up with 12 instead of, going into this year, as we started doing our planning in January and February, not knowing how recovery would look, we left the budget at 12, and if we didn't do the parking, we would have stayed with the 12 FTE budget. But given that we are going to parking, we want to hire both those positions. So again, there's two positions built in that $2.8 million budget, and that gets us the 7% increase primarily. The revenue we do expect to jump pretty dramatically. We think as we look at the year ahead, we are going to recover quite a bit of our revenue, but we'll still be well below the $4 million mark, I think, that we set back 2 years ago. So I think the total budgeted revenue for the year, I think you've got a 3.6, isn't that right?
3.5 and change.
Yeah, 3.5 and some change there, and you can see all these details on the budget summary there on the page 1 of the operating budget. And so I think the moral of the story is we have a very low growth budget, although we are adding one position. We expect a pretty sizable increase in revenue of about $1 million over what we thought we had last year, but still we're well below where we were 2 years ago. Part of that revenue increase is bringing the parking in-house. We do think we're going to net $100,000 more than what we had out of parking last year, which is still nothing great, but certainly it's moving in the right direction. And other than that, the budget's pretty self-explanatory as you look through the summary that we have there, kind of over the next 2 pages.
Notice the retirement line's back up to 37%.
That's the increment between the 7% budget that was budgeted in '21, and it was actually it was closer to 9% for '21. It was like 8.8%. So when we investigated that, we found out that what was budgeted for '21 was budgeted approximately 2% low. When we look at the statutory requirements for the year coming up, it is at 9%.
And that number comes from the state because we are public employees that pay into the PERS system. So we generally get the number from the state as to what we've got to budget at.
Any other comments from the Finance Committee members? Okay, awesome. All right, can I have a motion to accept the O&M budget for FY 21-22 as written?
I'll make the motion. Chair of the committee.
Second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on accepting the O&M budget for FY 21-22?
I was just looking on the 22 budget, it doesn't, is there a small capital expenditure that's not in there because it doesn't really foot down? Like $6,000 or something? You just gotta look it up.
Anywhere we're looking at there?
Which page are you on, Todd?
Page 1,
The summary doesn't foot out to the,
if you go up in the 22 budget there, and income before small capital expenditures, and then small capital expenditures is blank, and then the total is 774.
yeah. We did have small capital in there, but we've pulled those out. That was the office stuff on the.
Yeah, because you've got a small capital expenditure on the agenda.
Right, but any idea why the difference between the summary sheet and the budget?
I can check into that. I think that small capital expenditure was in there was in the template.
Six or
I can check into that.
But do you want to go take a look at that, David, and see if we can reconcile those two numbers?
Sure.
And then we can table this to the end of the
We'll
agenda.
table it until he comes back.
Okay.
All right, so with no further discussion, let's table the O&M budget for FY 2021 until it gets back and jump into item number 3, industrial wastewater discharge permit with the city of Great Falls for the glycol ponds.
Yeah, so as the memo says here, the current glycol ponds were permitted and built, now it's been 15 years ago, or I'm sorry, 10 years ago. And the city a few years back, I think it's about 2015, came to us and indicated that they wanted us to file a permit, and they wanted us to take the glycol ponds off the city sewer system. We indicated that probably wasn't a good idea because just in the event we get a very heavy wet winter, we need some place if we had to get that effluent treated. There isn't a recycling center near us. There are very few options for us to do that. So we didn't want to give up that sewer connection. At the time, we had a gentleman's agreement that if we ever did want to release the ponds, that we would contact the city, run some lab tests on it, get it to the pH they could handle, get it to the other performance criteria that they would require. Generally, you can change the chemistry of the pond pretty readily by adding fly ash and some other implements to get it to where a domestic sewer system can handle it. And so that went on for a number of years. And then this year, as we started talking about doing the de-icing ramp, the city resurfaced and said that we had refused to sign the agreement back in 2015, and so they wanted us to do it this time. We went back through the discussion and said, well, we never refused it, but we're willing to have that discussion. And so they asked that we fill out one of these permits so they can document everything that's tied into their sewer system, because they are beholden to their regulators to know what potential effluents might be coming into their system. And so Rod has done some lab tests. He was in the chemistry lab last week mixing up stuff.
So we got a Great Falls hire, see him more.
We sent some samples out for several $1,000s to have the material tested. The permit itself is what, $1,000?
Yeah, $1,100 for that.
$1,100, and then if we should ever decide we want to release it, we have to go through that again and have it retested, and then see what the city would want us to do to mediate it before we released it. And so the permit kind of just keeps our foot in the door, for the future, and we have some documented requirements that would be clear as to what we need to do if we want to release the pond. Ideally, we never will. The whole point of that pond system is to evaporate the effluent out of the de-icing, and then one day when we get the de-icing pads built, that'll help us to isolate that de-icing fluid to a smaller area, and so we can go and clean the ramp off, which shouldn't have the effluent in it, and allow that to go into our normal storm system because it's clean snow, and then all of the de-icing material would be in one place. And so that's the whole goal of that project. And by having this permit, that'll keep the sewer line in place, so we have that ability going forward. And so the sewer permit, sewer discharge permit, industrial wastewater permit is, it says attached. Did you?
We don't have
We
it.
don't have the permit yet.
Oh, we don't have it yet.
I was going to ask about that.
Well, we would like the permission to execute the permit once we have it in hand. These are fairly standard across the city, and so I imagine it's the same that other people are signing.
And did you say this does have an $1,100 bill attached, so we have to pay that?
We have to pay $1,100, and we've already paid for the lab tests, and then if we ever do want to reduce it, we got to start the lab testing all over again. So this gives them, when they talk to the regulators, some baseline for them to say, well, there's 1,500 gallons of airport stuff that could come that it looks like this. Several years ago, they kind of made some indications that we were releasing into and they were having problems on their lift station in the meeting we had with them, but we've never released it. In fact, the lever is rusted shut. So, it's a pretty good defense, I guess.
We were releasing some out of the FedEx system, but that was with their permission and lab tests and everything, and that didn't work very well because the tank over there is not very big. So by the time you fill the tank up, get it tested and released it, then you don't have anywhere to put the next snowstorm stuff. So we just been transferring that tank into the ponds.
And that's via truck?
Yep.
And eventually, you know, the CIP has a project to replace the FedEx system. That's an underground vault, and so it doesn't have the opportunity to ever evaporate. We want to go to a rubber-lined pond, which is kind of state-of-the-art. And the new FedEx lease has a maintenance reserve associated with it, so that we'll be putting away funds to pay for that in the future. And then 3, 4, 5 years down the road, we'll go in and put in a pond over there, and then pipe their system to it, so that we can do the same on their side. If you think about it, FedEx has by far the largest planes, so it's quite a bit of de-icing fluid, and we definitely in the future want to make sure that that we're not taking up capacity on the terminal system by using that FedEx kind of crutch. We want to have that system be a whole system too.
All right, so with that, can I get a and we don't have to approve that $1,100, that's just a year.
No, we're taking that out of the operating budget.
All right, a motion to approve the director to sign the industrial wastewater discharge permit required by Public Works. I have a motion, a second, and a second. Any further discussion? All right, I have a motion, a second, no further discussion. All in favor of accepting the wastewater discharge permit, do so saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion passes. Are you ready, David, or should we move on to the next?
No, we can go ahead. In the multiple discussions with John and myself regarding the small capital improvement budget, there was a supplemental schedule that was feeding page 1. So that was my error. The 26,000 was in the supplemental schedule feeding that. So it should be 800,030 total, and then working on forward. We have taken the small capital expenditures and summarized them as a separate agenda item.
Yeah, the main reason for that is in the Carissa funding that we're receiving, we are getting some reimbursement for the concessions relief that we received or that we offered to our tenants. So the first phase of that relief is about $37,000. That will be reimbursed. Our actual reimbursement is before the FAA right now. We expect that will be approved probably in the next week. So we're going to have $37,000 coming in. Rather than put the small capital in the new operating budget, we want to match that revenue to a use of that revenue, and so we want to use those dollars to pay for our small capital items, which are already on the agenda. So we want to do them in the current fiscal year is the short answer, so that we don't have a $37,000 revenue surprise, because essentially a revenue surprise, all that does is a lot of that would go back to the airlines at the end of the year, and we're already favorable on the operating results from the current year. So we want to use up that $37,000 when it comes in to get a project done that we need to do, rather than have that surplus.
So the way I understand it, David, is our actual operating budget number is correct. The operating budget summary was short by the $26,000.
Correct.
So we don't have to do any amendments or modifications to the actual O&M
Nope.
budget. Everybody agree with that? All right, cool. Any further discussion on accepting the FY21-22 operating budget as written? All right, no further discussion. All in favor of accepting the FY21-22 O&M budget as written, say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Budget passes.
Thank you.
All right, back to the parking lot. Just can't get rid of that. Parking lot IT acquisition service contract.
Yeah, as we discussed a couple months ago, our server on the parking garage is in need of replacement. It's already 6 years old. We don't currently own a firewall. The firewall is owned by Republic, who's the parking lot vendor. And we also don't have any fiber optics or any other communications that go between the parking booth and the terminal. We need to solve those couple of issues so that we can implement self-park. We need to have that firewall in place so that there's no way to attribute any attack to the credit card information or to our server and infiltrate the entire system. So we need that firewall in place. Obviously, we need a new server, and then we need a camera system, as I mentioned earlier, for us to support the self-pay as best we can. so that we can help people get in and out of the lot. We did go out RFP as we told the board we would. The IT services here, we received one proposal for about $23,000. We think we'll probably need some help from those same IT consultants as we get the pay stations in place and as we get the self-pay on the phone. We may need some on-call services to help us get that implemented. So we think the total of this project item is likely to be about $33,000, and that'll give us some space in there to get done the IT upgrades, and then also some on-call services as we implement that system.
And this is assuming the previous one we approved has all the fiber optic already installed and everything out to the remote stations.
No, the 33,000 will cover the cost of that fiber.
The fiber as well as. Okay. All right,
Yes.
cool. All right. We have a motion to authorize contract with Systems Technology Consultants to install and maintain parking lot IT equipment to the amount not to exceed $33,000.
I make a motion.
A second. I got a motion and a second. Any further discussion regarding the IT equipment?
Do they have like annual fees going forward after this initial?
There will be some annual operating costs to upkeep our systems, which will pay in the operating budget too. We have built some of that into the operating budget already. The current operating budget includes some gate arm type of replacements and that kind of thing. That's part of the 7% is the cost of operating that garage. We also, or the lot, we also plan to use not Sletton, I always get the name wrong, Liggett, to continue to plow those lots. With only 4 or 5 guys moving snow most of the time, it's beneficial for us to have an independent operator doing the parking lot that can kind of focus on that. So we'll continue that model for a while. One day we might decide, hey, let's hire another FTE, or we need another FTE for something else, and in the wintertime there's time for them to do the lots. But for the time being, we've got enough change. We want to continue to have somebody else doing those parking lots. They do a pretty good job of it.
Awesome. Any other questions? All right, no further questions. All in favor of authorization and contract with Systems Technology Consultants to install and maintain IT equipment not to exceed $33,000, do so by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion passes. All right, centralized de-icing facility construction.
So this is our main capital project for the year. This is to construct the de-icing pads, which basically connect Romeo 1 and 2, creating kind of a separate de-icing area from the terminal ramp, allowing us to keep those 2 taxiways unobstructed during de-icing. And in the summertime, we use these for remote parking. We had a number of situations where that would have been handy over the last few years. As you can see in the operating budget portion, we planned on this project costing about $6 million, the majority of which will come from discretionary, AIP discretionary funds, plus our entitlements. We opened bids yesterday. We received bids in excess of $9.4 million, 9.4, right? 9.3, 9.4, well outside of our budget. As we speak, we've been in discussions with the single bid to try and negotiate that back, and already we've cleared out a few million, but there's still quite a bit of heavy lifting to do. We don't know for certain that we'll be able to do that. It's likely that at this point that we will cancel the project and try again in 2 years when the FAA can find another hole for discretionary money. As we all know, the current inflationary environment is out of control. And we saw that in twofold in these bids, and talking to the contractor the last couple of days. There's quite a bit of inflation on material itself. In some parts of the country, there's a concrete shortage. That didn't impact us. They're saying they can find concrete, but their source of aggregate currently is out of town. So we've got that trucking cost. The single bidder is out of Spokane, so there's a tremendous amount of mobilization costs in their cost. And they would have to bring a concrete plant all the way over here. None of the local vendors have the capacity to help this year. They're saying they don't have the manpower. It doesn't even seem as though they have the manpower to create the aggregate. There's a massive labor shortage impacting all the contractors that we spoke to in the region. They can't find enough people to go out and work. The unemployment benefits are a big part of that. Both of them that we talked to stated that. And so we're kind of high-centered at the moment. We have the rest of this week, more or less, to try and negotiate a couple more $1 million out of this program. If that's successful, we would come back to the board in June with a modified budget if it exceeds $6 million, which I expect it would. The other part of the equation is the funding. Because everybody's bids are over, the FAA is indicating they don't have a lot of latitude to find us additional dollars. We don't know how much latitude they might have if we could get this down close to $6 million, if that money's there or not. It sounds as though they're very concerned that a lot of bids are going to overrun. Obviously, we can't have a system where no one can use the dollars that are being created. So we urged FAA this morning to think hard about where they could find those types of dollars, because if everyone's going to overrun the project and no one gets anything done, obviously that can't exist. That ecosystem can't exist very long either. And so as we sit here right now, I don't know what the answer is. It may be that we can get this down closer to $6 million, and we would have a project, and the FAA will greenlight it. We have until the 1st of June to figure it out, at which time our entitlement dollars, we either have to punt on those entitlement dollars. We have 3 options. We either tell the FAA we're not going to use them, take them back, and then we get them again next year, in which case we probably roll it into the terminal program for next year, and wait until 2023 in order to attack this project again. Number 2, we could find an airport in our region that could use the money this year and would agree to pay us back next year. And so we'll shop that out to the couple of airports we know that need some dollars. I imagine if everyone is overrunning everything, and we have 2 or 3 major terminal projects in the state that haven't opened bids yet, there might be some need for that $1.8 million. And we can sign an agreement with them to give us those dollars back next year. Number 3, we figure out a way to get this thing down to something we can afford. We greenlight the FAA by the end of the week. We come back to the board at the end of June and ask for budget approval on the revised budget, and we move forward. Those are the 3 things that could happen. My advice on what I'd like the board to do is go ahead and authorize this budget as it sits at $6 million. In the event we throw a Hail Mary and get it in within $6 million, figure something out, cut it back, find something that we can pave for that budget. I'd like to have authorization to move forward with that budget. As I pointed out to the FAA this morning, I heard last week that the ARPA dollars, which are going to be ladled over top of everything we're talking about now, those dollar amounts haven't even been finalized. And yet there's one more package that hasn't even been approved yet, which will be on top of that. The ARPA dollars that are coming to the city of Great Falls, are, as they said in the meeting last week, are estimated to be somewhere in the neighborhood of $9 million. And so as that money hits the contracting community, because it hasn't yet, they've got until 2026 to spend those dollars. I think we have a multi-year problem, probably in the neighborhood of 5 to 7 years. So if that is true, then the FAA's got to figure out how to succeed in this environment and actually build pavements that keep the airports open. So it may be a very long-term problem we've got here. And so, again, my best advice would be I would ask that the board approve the $6 million budget. We'll do our best this week to negotiate that back, pull out any of the stops that we can come up with to knock it down. And if we can get it within that price, we'll proceed. If not, we've got until the end of the week to find another airport that can use those dollars.
Maybe you can find an airport that can give us those dollars.
I think that's just
a thought. Hail Mary.
Well, I mean, the main problem with getting dollars this year is we would have to pay it back next year. So we would take money from next year and forward it to this year, and then we wouldn't have anything for next year. I would rather try to see if we can get rid of our dollars this year to somebody that would pay us back next year, when we can actually put the money towards a project so that we can keep going. Ideally, we'll get this down somewhat closer, and the FAA will make a leap and say that they can fund it. That may not be the case. We may ultimately not have a project this summer.
Make sure I'm looking at the right recommendation here. All right, so can I have a motion to authorize the airport director to construct the de-icing ramp project for a total budget not to exceed $6 million and authorize cash funds the start of the project from reserves until grant funds are available to reimburse us and in the amount of not to exceed $2.1 million.
That's the other piece of this project. We have a little bit of a timing issue, which again, we had a long discussion with the FAA about that today. The way the FAA is issuing dollars right now, we couldn't really get this project bid out until May because we knew that they would have to hold bids potentially for 60, 90 days until the grant would come. The problem with that is we're now behind every other regional project that wanted to kick off this spring. And so we're at the back end of these contractors' books where they don't have a ton of labor left. And it would be ideal if the FAA could push money out right after the beginning of the federal fiscal year, at say January or February. If we could get those dollars early and be in an early bid environment and award right away, there's a better chance that we could get in the books to get this project done. Because they couldn't do that, there was no way we could ask contractors to hold their bids from, say, March until the grant comes in July. Even as it is now, we just opened bids yesterday, and we're asking them to hold bids until probably July 4th. In the inflationary environment we're in, that's a stretch. As the contractors are saying, their bids are only good for a couple days now on PVC, copper, any of those things. And so the whole system is gummed up right now with that problem. And so as it sits now, in order to make our best shot at reducing the cost and bringing the project in a single construction season, what our plan would be to do is to go ahead and authorize construction as soon as we can. If we can get it down to $6 million, we would cash fund the entitlement portion of that, $1.8 million, plus our local share, which we had in there about $200,000 just in case bids were high. So we would fund that $2.1 million until the grant came in, and then we would get reimbursed from the grant. We are not allowed to reimburse ourselves for discretionary dollars. So that $4 million almost portion of the project that's coming from discretionary, the FAA does not allow us to reimburse ourselves for that. So we can't forward that. So this whole plan is predicated on the idea we would get a grant sometime sort of August, September, and then reimburse that $2.1 million that we would be pushing out. So that's another component, kind of risk component. In the worst case scenario, if the FAA is so busy that they can't issue us a grant this year, which is unlikely, then what we had agreed on with the FAA is next year we would use our entitlements to pay back what we were out in cash plus some discretionary money. So there's that component to it also. We still have that in here that we would want to proceed that way. The winter protection on this project, if we just did the grading and the gravel, kind of like what United ended up doing last year on the Mang project, just the winter protection portion bidded out at like $150,000, wasn't it? 500,000. So just the winter protection is $500,000. So we really don't want to do that. We want to try to get this thing done this fiscal year if we're going to do it at all. And so that's just extra cost for nothing. I mean, it literally is concrete blankets and stuff that we don't get to keep. You know, so I mean, that's wasted money. And so I would recommend that we do move this as stated. We'll do what we can this week to figure it out, and we'll update you in June.
Sounds reasonable. All right, would anybody like me to restate the motion? Anybody like to initiate the motion?
I'll make the motion.
And a second?
Second.
All right, got a motion and a second. Any further discussion regarding the centralized de-icing facility construction? Sounds like possibly an all or nothing, but negotiations are still ongoing.
We made some good strides already, and it's only been a day, and so, you know, we might come up with some other solutions. There might be a way to, you know, to cut the project scope back some. You know, one of the challenges we have this morning, and I think it was a little bit quick on the trigger, is the FAA said, well, you know, we think these bids are, you know, are too high, and so they have to concur with our bids, you know, but if this is the environment you're in, you got to start concurring with something, otherwise we might as well just, you know, tell the planes to take a year off again. You know, I mean, you know, there's a lot of projects that need to move forward. So if this is the bid environment, you know, then, you know, we're going to have to react to it because these ARPA funds and whatever's coming next, that's going to be a 4 or 5 year rollout. So, I mean, it's not gonna get a ton easier.
John, is there a scenario where we would, initiate this, start this, and either, get stuck with the bill or get stuck with an incomplete project?
It's possible we could, I don't think we would get stuck with the bill because it's eligible work. I mean, there is, if nothing else, the FAA more or less has to give us our entitlements, which is $1.8 million. We would issue a stop work at some point to avoid, going beyond another 1.8, which would be next year's entitlements. And so we can kind of count on that amount of money, the 3.6 million plus the 200,000 local that we're saying. So $3.5–4 million worth of money, we know we can acquire that in the next year. There is certainly a possibility that, we get stuck with a winter shutdown. That's definitely a possibility, always was with this project. But I think that it's fairly likely that the FAA can find the dollars that they're, the $6 million. If we go beyond that, we may have to come back in June and say, okay, we need another $500,000 out of reserves. Hey, by the way, we have, dollars we can use for that because we have CARES money, we have other sources that we weren't expecting, so we can put that in. I mean, the local share on this project would normally be $600,000, but because FAA has suspended that, it's to our advantage to spend $400,000 or $500,000 because that 100% entitlement environment is not going to last another 2–3 years. So I mean, at some point, it kind of makes sense for us to throw a little bit in the kitty to get this thing done on a year when it's 100% entitlements, 100% AIP funding, because if we can get the project forward, that's good. So there are a number of scenarios that could happen. Like I said, the main one is by June 1st, we have to decide if we're going to spend those entitlements or turn them back in, or lend them to an airport that'll pay us back next year and get that agreement done. So that's the quick action we have to take internally. When we come back in June, we should have reformulated the funding plan, and we're either asking for a little bit more money, or we don't have a project this year, something like that, are the likely scenarios.
Is there a possibility to do it in a 2-phase process to get the cost structure under control, where you could actually do phase 1 and then on the other side of Romeo 2, phase 2, or however the layout
I don't
is?
think that would be advantageous. I mean, because you're doing concrete, so I mean, you're talking dowel rotted pads, and so I mean, I think more than likely we can certainly cut the scope of the project back and try to get it back to something that would be helpful but not optimal, and then one day take on an expansion of that. I think doing a phasing is more than likely going to cost us a lot more, because now we're asking the contractor to come in and build less, and then in another year remobilize. Certainly we'd have to rebid it. No contractor will hold the prices for multiple years. Then remobilize, restart everything.
Well, and I may have misspoke, like you just alluded to, less than you want, but enough to get by with a future expansion to where we are now. That's
certainly part of it is, if we can find a way to cut a phase of, a portion of the concrete back so we have a smaller pad, that might be advantageous. I mean, we're going to still have to get FAA concurrence on that. We're going to have to get contractor concurrence on that because it isn't what we did. There's a number of things there. I mean, and it doesn't help us either. There was new regulations out, in terms of aggregate. There was some new requirements for that no one's ever built yet. And so there's a regulatory environment that doesn't help us this year either. So there's a number of factors in there for sure.
Okay. Any other questions, discussion? All right. All in favor I'm sorry.
Comment. John, you had mentioned that the FAA kind of, in your comments concerning the FAA, that they kind of pushed back a little bit about that. I find it interesting that, and I get it, that the contractor perhaps is from Spokane. Some of those costs are going to be a little bit extraordinary, but of all the places in Montana, I think Great Falls has the least pressure on all these dynamics compared to the Bozeman's and Billings and Missoula and so forth. I'm thinking those costs have got to be far greater in those communities than they are here. So it's just surprising that the FAA would make that kind of a comment unless their head is kind of buried in the sand.
I think we're at the beginning wave of bid openings, that are being impacted by this. I mean, some people had bids last year that there's, the project's carrying over. But I think over the next few weeks, as some of those other bids open, it's going to be enlightening as to what the bid environment is. And so, I mean, it's easy, it's free to talk, about, extraordinary bid costs, and there are some in here. I think just the cuts that we've made already kind of bring it closer to what probably some of the others are seeing, where you might have, more local contractors. I mean, Spokane's pretty far. And from talking to them, the locals had really not a lot of interest in helping them on their subcontractor pricing, because they're busy with their own work. So if you're in a Colorado Springs or a Denver or something, you might have enough slop in the system, there in that bigger environment that you've got, the bidding community large enough to handle that. But yeah, I think over the next few weeks, there's going to be a lot of pressure on a number of bids. So it's going to be interesting to see how many projects get shelved this year.
Are you aware of any other airports in Montana that are going to have significant projects?
Well, there's a bunch of terminal projects. I mean, everyone's got one, right?
They're in motion right now, but ones that are going to be open bid.
I don't know. Is Helena open their runway? Does anybody know?
Yeah, they're under construction on the Helena Airport, so that was an early bid opening on
Yeah.
the Helena one.
See, that's another piece of the puzzle that's problematic is because the runway projects are always going to get funded first. So they're getting the first cut of funding back before everyone realized the inflationary environment was terrible. So I mean they can. We knew we were never going to get a grant until midsummer, and so that forced us into a bid opening later in the year because no contractor will hold their bids for 4 or 5 months. I mean, that just, that isn't something that the bid environment will support. And so, I mean, that's part of the problem. And one of the things we talked about with FAA earlier is, if we could just get an earlier grant, if we're gonna have to start over in 2023, it would be advantageous to have an early grant so that we're not going through a late bid cycle project. So the next round of bids will all be this week for the cut of funding we're in. So I think we're going to start seeing some of these other ones come out. Be interesting what some of those bids are.
Well, over the years, I've watched this airport put a lot of pressure on the FAA and sometimes prevail.
I don't know if we'll get there this time. I mean, finding $3 million is a big ask. But we have to look at it and say, I mean, is that a reasonable bid? I mean, certainly not $9 million. But if we could get it down to $7 million, is that reasonable? I mean, when do we see the horizon where bids will return to normal? I mean, my look at it right now, I mean, chime in engineers, I mean, I think that's probably a 3 or 4 year horizon. The labor problem will probably get better because the unemployment benefits are going to start going away. However, when every community in the entire state's going to be getting millions of dollars to, spruce things up, I mean, that's going to be a wild scene for a number of years.
Good question. Any other questions, comments?
So instead of hoarding toilet paper, we should all be hoarding PVC right now. Other building material.
Paint, latex paint. I can't even get my house painted because they're out of latex paint. Oh my God. All right, so let's vote on the central de-icing facility construction and authorize the airport director to construct the de-icing ramp project for a budget not to exceed $6 million and further request authorization to cash fund the start of the project from reserves until grant funds are available to reimburse an amount not to exceed $2.1 million. All in favor of, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Say nay. Motion passes. Good luck. Let's hope it comes down to 6. Okay. How are we doing? Good. How about task order number 1 and 2, airline ticket counter and ticketing lobby expansion?
Yes, this project comes from the master plan a number of years ago that identified we've got a deficit of circulation space more or less right below us in the ticket counter area. You've all checked in, you know what it's like down there when the queues are full at Delta, and especially when there's an Allegiant flight, there really isn't any room for those people to get past the Delta counter. And then add to that people coming in the door, which is only 25 feet away from the counter, and we have a problem down there, even with our current volumes. I was down there, about a month ago, I think it might have even been March, and I snapped a picture. We had 2 flights going out and how busy it was in that ticketing lobby area, even though we're in the midst of a pandemic and everyone's running 50% load. There certainly isn't space to add on top of that problem, spacing. Trying to keep people 6 feet apart down there is whimsical. There just isn't any way to do it. Even if you can do it with the people in the ticketing line, the people trying to circulate past them are within an arm's reach of those other folks, and then tack onto that people trying to come in the door. In part of our look at that back in 2014, when we did the terminal remodel, this project is related also to the CBIS project, Centralized Baggage Inspection System. As we designed that project back in the 14 remodel, one of the ideas we had is to recess that ticket counter back about 25 feet. So if you think of it today where it is, we'll be backing it all the way up to the top of the escalator. It's basically at the bottom of the escalator now. We'll be backing it up to the top of the escalator, and it'll be under the low-hung ceiling, much like this, rather than being out in the kind of great hall of that first floor. And so that entire great hallway, which is terrazzo today, would be the circulation area. And then once you get to where the ticket counters are today, that would begin the ticketing queuing. So you would have your snake lines there. We'd also have room in that space to add some remote check-in kiosks. Today we're somewhat limited. There just isn't anywhere to put them. Delta has one up on the second floor. This would allow for some of those to be in line with the ticketing line so that they can actually have them back in there and having people check in. Today, a couple of the airlines have the ticketing kiosks at their station where they also work the computer. And so if no one's working that station, it works out well. But if someone's actually working that station, it kind of defeats the purpose, because a person that could be checked in by a person is using the kiosk instead of being checked in by the person. So this will allow for some remote stations, which will allow people to check themselves in, potentially even print a bag tag, and then walk that tag over to a bag drop type of thing. This project would also enable us to sort of revolutionize the ticket counter process that we have down there. We'd be looking to each of the airlines to come in with whatever system is most current for them. Alaska, for example, does allow people to print their own bag tag and you take it over to a station and weigh it, and then it just goes onto the bag belt. We would probably have less of a counter and more workstations. That's what you see at more of the larger airports today. As those are renovated, the airlines are less hidden behind a counter and more working at a kiosk. Things are flatter, a little less linear back in there, so we would also do that. The current ticket counters more or less haven't changed since the airlines came in. Back in the 70s, some of them, it's in the same location, much the same process. Many of those bag belts were all of the bag belts were installed by the airlines themselves. No one has any plans to them. The equipment's pretty old. United's was down for nearly a month, a couple weeks ago. And so the equipment is just dated and it's time to replace it. Those ticketing offices that the airlines have behind there are not sized correctly. United has a bunch of vacant space kind of locked back in the island that they have behind there. Delta uses most of their space, and Alaska and Allegiant kind of share space. What we'd like to do is kind of modernize that, go back to the airlines and ask what they actually need, and then size that appropriately so we don't have trapped space behind there. The new baggage system, once it would go in with this project, we would take that over and begin to operate that, which right now we're not doing. So those costs would eventually be in the terminal rents going forward, rather than the airlines trying to fix them themselves. And then what we would do on the bag claim side, for the time being, because we're not in the queue for a centralized baggage inspection system, is essentially we would blow out all the walls that are currently there, and of course everything recesses back. We would enclose the remodel from 2014. We'd find some kind of panelized and insulated system, enclose those walls, and then inside of that enclosed space would be the new baggage inspection system, and it would be shared. rather than having an individual garage bay for every airline, and at one point we had baggage inspection system for every airline. Now United has lost the system because the TSA system they use isn't used anymore. So they have to cart their bags over to Delta to have them checked. And even last week, TSA, the district, Montana district manager was here asking if we could find some way to help fix that process because it's becoming so cumbersome to get the bags over to Delta. And we said, well, we'd like to do that. So what we want to do is have those two machines in that common space. There'd be room in there to circulate baggage carts in and out, and the airlines or TSA, whichever way they want to do it, would be responsible for getting the bags from the belts back to the screening machines and screened and then out. Once we do a CBIS system in the future, which will come later down the road, TSA would fund some portion of that. We'd have a conveyor system that would take the bags to the baggage inspection system, and then they would be vetted, and then the airlines would have a common pickup of some kind or another. And so this is kind of the first step in doing a CBIS on the back of the house and the front of the house. This is kind of the end solution of creating a circulation space that works, recessing those counters back, modernizing all of that front-end customer experience, and creating some space down there so that we can do some spacing. As the memo says, we think that we haven't been told for certain, but we're fairly certain that CRRSA dollars can be used for this project because it will reduce transmission. The guidelines for ARPA are not out yet, but we've been told that it's similar. So we expect we'll be able to use our ARPA dollars for this project also. We don't really know what the ARPA dollar amounts are. The most conservative estimate I've heard is it'll be much similar to the CRRSA numbers. I don't know, Scott, maybe you guys have heard anything more than that, but yeah, exactly. So we expect we're going to get somewhere in the neighborhood of $1.8 million from CRRSA. We expect we're going to get somewhere in the neighborhood of $1.8 million from ARPA. And then we have money in next year's entitlement grants to the tune of about $1.8 million also that could be in play for this project, which we think we'd have enough funding to implement it. In order to do that, we need to start on some architectural work. The first step would be to execute a scope of work with our selected architect, which is a team of RS&H, Morrison & Merrily, and locally LaRue Page Warner, to design these projects we're talking about. There's actually two projects in there. We're also anticipating the need to create one new ticket counter space. Initially, that ticket counter space might be used to accommodate airlines as we displace them and renovate their areas. And if we don't have to do that, then that ticket counter space would potentially be available for a new airline entrant. And then once we're done, that would be available for a new airline entrant. As we've discussed recently, there's been some new additions to the airline lexicon. Levio, Southwest is now active in Montana. There's also Breeze has started service out east. So we think in the future there's potential that we might have more airlines than we have today. Certainly there's others active, American, for example, in Montana, that aren't here, JetBlue, another. So we think it's wise to go ahead and create one additional ticket counter position that would be for the future. So that's kind of combined in the scope of work. That's why we have task 1 and 2. One task would be to create that new counter position. Another task would be to expand the ticketing lobby. They're most likely linked. It would be all the same project, but we want to kind of have them separate in case we have to pull one forward. Let's say, for example, tomorrow we get a call and Virgin Atlantic wants service here. Then we would implement one portion of this and not the other and get a ticket counter built. But like I said, the first step is always design. We want to have permission to go ahead and execute that scope of work and get going on the design of these two projects.
All right, now motion to request authority to execute task order number 1 and 2 in the amount not to exceed $698,349.
I'll make a motion.
Second? Cool. I got a motion and a second. Any further discussion regarding the design plan for the airline ticket counter and ticketing lobby expansion?
There's just a little, on page 16, the total amount is $496 different than the $698, $349, but the motion is for the $349, so it's probably just probably something got changed in the numbers and then just didn't get changed.
We have not negotiated the scope of work yet, so we still have a little bit of work to do to go back and negotiate it.
Okay.
So,
So it'll be consistent.
Yep.
Okay.
All right, with no further questions or discussions, all in favor of the motion, state aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion passes. And last but not least, capital purchase admin office IT equipment.
Yeah, as we mentioned before, we had previously had some small IT capital purchases in the budget. Because we are going to receive some additional dollars from Carissa, we want to move that forward and match that revenue with the cost of these projects. Our current printer, about 15 years old, maybe even closer to 20, and it's having some issues. Even yesterday, we couldn't get it to print, and so we have to call service up to work on it. It's just near the end of its useful life. The server we last replaced in 2014. If you're familiar with those servers, that's 6-7 years, about all you can expect from an office server these days. So we're at that point again, time to replace that. In addition, we also have a badging system that's pretty aged. Right now, we're keeping track of all those individual records in Excel. And then we have a printer that'll print those onto a card, and then we laminate that card. The laminating machine's starting to go. The system we're using to keep track of those is probably beyond its means. We'd like to buy a badging system that would where you would key in the information, it would retain it, and then we could print reports that we could email rather than just emailing on stuff we get out of Excel. We think we can accomplish all three of those things for $37,000 to complete the three IT projects that are in that admin project, and so we'd like permission to move forward with that.
Okay. I have a motion to authorize expenditure up to $37,000 to address IT upgrades for the administration area. Dave, you sound like you want to make a motion.
I'll make that motion.
Thanks. Second.
I'll second.
All right, I have a motion and a second. Any discussion or questions? All right, no further discussion or questions. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion passes. You can get a new copy. Okay, excellent. Let's finish up the main meeting. We, again, number 9 will be delayed till next month for technical issues. So any additional airport board comments? Commissioner Gibbs?
Nope.
Commissioner Lalonde?
Nope.
Commissioner Tebow?
None.
Commissioner Aritz?
None.
Commissioner Smith?
None.
I have no additional comments. Any from the staff? And any public comments? Outstanding. With no additional comments, no further business coming in front of the board, I declare this meeting adjourned. Let's take a 10-minute break. Let's be back at 14:40 for the work session. Rehydrate.
Been doing. Been doing a lot.